I'm curious as to your thoughts about the NATO alliance and the Biden administration's handling of the NATO alliance, because I think it's safe to say that when President Biden took office, I think NATO was at a point of weakness and a little bit of disarray and a lack of cohesion. And this war really seems to have galvanized that alliance. Now you've got Finland and Sweden joining NATO. And then the recent commitment at the most recent NATO summit of those member nations to increase their defense spending to 2% of GDP. So I'm curious as to your assessment of how the Biden administration has kind of handled that alliance, especially given the questioning of the alliance by the previous administration, and whether or not that's something that going forward, looking ahead into the future, does this mean a revitalized NATO? Does this mean a stronger NATO? And what those impacts might be on, I don't know, U.S. defense spending?
Well, I think Biden's done a very good job with NATO. I don't necessarily think we've done a very good job with the Ukraine problem broadly defined, because without blaming the United States for the war, I do think that this policy dating back to George W. Bush of publicly saying that someday we'll bring Ukraine into NATO, but not yet, and with no timeline and no interim security guarantee, was sort of like painting a bullseye on Ukraine's back and putting them out to the end of the limb on the tree. And to mix some metaphors, but you see my point. It created all the wrong incentives and none of the protections that Ukraine would have needed. And I also think that even in 2021, and then leading into the outbreak of the war on February 24th, 2022, or at least leading into the all-out invasion, because of course Russia's been fighting Ukraine since 2014 in one way or another. But in that period of time, the Biden administration did a great job releasing intelligence to show that Putin had this war planned and that it was not going to be Ukraine's fault when it occurred, and also warning President Zelensky to be more careful about his personal safety and to believe that this war really could happen when the Ukrainians, like me, did not really think it would happen, assumed it was a coercive threat to try to get Kyiv to change policy, but not that it was actually going to represent the insanity that it's become. Ukraine, in a sense, like myself, had a maybe higher opinion of Vladimir Putin's intelligence and morality, but at least intelligence, than turns out to have been warranted. But in any event, I don't think the Biden team did a great job in that period, because I think there were ways to think about alternative security architectures for Europe and for Ukraine specifically that would not have required us keeping this sort of dangling promise of eventual NATO membership as the centerpiece of our strategy. I'm not saying that, again, that was the only reason that Putin attacked Ukraine. I'm not saying that it was our fault that he attacked, but I do think we created unwise incentives, and that we could have foreseen an aspect of the Russian political psyche and Putin's psyche that would have reacted the way it did to this promise. So when I say Biden's done a good job, it is on the specific question that you raised of managing the alliance, having the alliance work well together, having the alliance cohere, patiently bringing in Finland and Sweden, and being well postured to deal with any Russian threat in the future. It's too high of a price for a stronger alliance. You know, I would much rather have had a little weaker alliance and no war in Europe. But I think that it is a stronger alliance, and it is to Biden's credit.